Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to help you become truly well-informed. Today, we're taking a deep dive into an ancient text, specifically Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 32. And what's really remarkable about this passage is its profound and maybe even surprising relevance for us today.
It really is. It tackles some fundamental questions about human understanding or misunderstanding of the divine.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore just what this section of Scripture claims about that, especially, its deliberate misunderstanding of God. We want to unpack why its message about people not thinking the knowledge of God is worth retaining might be, particularly important for you to consider today.
Especially in our world, right, where information is everywhere, but maybe those foundational truths get overlooked sometimes.
Right. It's a passage making some bold claims, wouldn't you say, about how accessible knowledge of God is and the consequences, pretty far-reaching consequences, when that knowledge is deliberately ignored. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the passage kicks off with a powerful statement. It talks about God's wrath being revealed against all the ungodliness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. That sets a serious tone straight away, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand what God's wrath means in this context. It's not really like a short temper.
Right, not like human anger.
No, exactly. It's more a theological concept. Think of it as the inherent righteous consequences, or maybe the natural justice that, according to this passage, unfolds when people actively turn away from fundamental truth.
That's a really key distinction, and the text immediately clarifies why this consequence, this wrath, is directed.
Precisely. It's not random. It's against those who actively suppress the truth. That word suppress is vital. It implies there's a truth already known, or at least accessible, that's being deliberately pushed down, ignored.
So it's not just about lacking knowledge.
No, the text paints a picture where humanity isn't just ignorant, it's actively involved in suppressing something known. The choice to reject knowledge is presented as the issue, not the absence of it. That's quite profound, really.
It is. And then the text asks, well, how? How has this knowledge been made plain enough for suppression to even be possible? It says, what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. How?
And it gives a very specific answer. Verse 20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made.
So through creation itself, the universe is the evidence.
That's the foundational claim here.
Yeah.
Creation is presented as this persistent, undeniable witness, and the implication drawn from that is huge, so the people are without excuse.
Wow. So an innate, observable understanding available to everyone just by looking at the world, regardless of background.
That's what the text argues, that these fundamental truths aren't hidden away somewhere secret. They're openly displayed.
Which means, from this perspective, rejecting them isn't due to lack of evidence, but a choice, a deliberate choice. And that choice has a cost.
Exactly. That's the setup. The text implies there's no neutral ground here. Ignoring the evidence is itself a choice with consequences. Yeah. That's the challenge for you listening, this idea of inherent knowledge and accountability.
Okay, so it establishes that knowledge of God is plain, self-evident through creation, but then it immediately pivots, doesn't it, to the human response?
Right. It describes this response as, tragic, a choice that sets off a whole chain reaction of consequences.
So what happens when this truth is faced and then disregarded? The text says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. Okay, that's the first step.
A failure to acknowledge or give credit where it's due, essentially.
And the result, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. That's quite a progression. Knowing, not acknowledging then, intellectual and spiritual dullness.
That seems to be the idea. Futile thinking, darkened hearts. What does that really mean? The text suggests it's a deliberate turning away from known truth that leads to a loss of clarity, of purpose. Maybe even a diminished capacity to perceive reality clearly.
So it's not just forgetting something. It's an active process that degrades how you think and feel.
That's the implication. Rejecting this foundational truth isn't just presented as a moral failing, but something that impacts your intellect, your spirit, how you process everything.
And it keeps going. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. A real paradox.
Stark contrast, isn't it? Claiming wisdom, but ending up in foolishness.
And what's the specific foolish action highlighted here? The text says they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images. Images made to look like humans, birds, animals, reptiles.
Right. And connecting this to the bigger picture, it's describing a massive exchange, almost cosmic, trading the glory of the immortal God, the ultimate, uncreated reality for finite, created things.
Like idols, basically.
Yes, and remember the context. In the Roman world, making and worshiping images, emperors, gods, animals was totally normal, part of everyday culture.
So the text is critiquing that.
It sees it as more than just a different religious practice. It's framed as a deep philosophical error, swapping the ultimate invisible reality for visible, temporary representations, exchanging the eternal for the perishable, the creator for the created.
So the thought for us is sometimes our own sense of wisdom might lead us away from foundational truth, maybe towards worshiping, well, lesser things, created objects, ideas, maybe even ourselves.
That's certainly a challenging implication to consider.
Okay, then the next section introduces this recurring phrase, and it's quite startling. Therefore, God gave them over. It shows up 3 times, quickly. Seems like a major turning point. What's going on with that phrase?
It really is a critical phrase here. Appearing 3 times signals its importance. It's a literary device, and theologically, it doesn't necessarily mean God actively imposes something evil.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It's often interpreted as a withdrawal of divine restraint or guidance. Since people rejected the knowledge of God, the text suggests they are then allowed, or given over, to follow the path their own desires lead them down, which, in the text's view, inevitably leads to further degradation.
So less like God pushing them down, more like letting go and allowing the natural consequences of their choice to unfold.
That's a common understanding, yes. A sort of divine permission for the chosen path to run its course.
The first instance is verse 24. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. And it explicitly links this back. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator.
You see the connection. The text presents this impurity as a direct, physical manifestation of that earlier spiritual exchange.
How so?
By valuing created things over the Creator, the text suggests people logically start to devalue their own created bodies and others, leading to impurity. It's like an outward symptom of the inward disorder.
Okay, that makes sense within the text's logic. Then it intensifies with the second, gave them over.
Yes, verses 26 and 27. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. And then it gets quite specific, mentioning women exchanging natural sexual relations for unnatural ones, and men abandoning natural relations with women and being inflamed with lust for one another, committing shameful acts with other men.
Right. This is obviously a passage that gets cited in modern debates, but focusing on the historical context, how might the original audience have understood natural relations here?
That's a really crucial point for interpretation. In that ancient context, natural often related to perceived societal norms, procreation as a primary purpose of sex, and what they saw as the intended order within creation. These views were common in many ancient cultures, not unique to this text.
So the passage frames deviation from those norms as a further consequence.
Exactly. As another sign of deepening disorder stemming from that initial spiritual turning away, it's presented as moving beyond just individual acts to a more fundamental reordering of relationships, reflecting, in the text's view, an even deeper internal confusion.
Okay. And then the third gave them over in verse 28 brings us right back to the core theme of knowledge.
Yes. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done.
So this is where that initial rejection of knowledge really hits home, impacting their very thinking, their reason.
Precisely. This final giving over lands squarely in the cognitive realm. The text is making a direct link. Consistently choosing not to value, not to retain the knowledge of God, leads, it argues, to a fundamental corruption of thought itself, a depraved mind.
And that's not just about making bad choices anymore.
It's deeper than that, according to the text. It's about losing the capacity to even discern right from wrong foundationally. The idea here, for you listening, is that this deliberate disregard for foundational knowledge about God could cascade into this state, this depraved mind, unable to see what ought not to be done. That's a really challenging thought, especially today with our emphasis on individual autonomy in thought.
So what does this depraved mind actually look like in practice, according to the passage? It then provides this pretty extensive list of behaviors and attitudes. It's quite bleak.
It is, and what's striking is the sheer breadth of it all. It paints a picture of comprehensive moral decay, doesn't it?
Yeah, read the list. Filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Wow.
It covers so much ground.
It's not just the really big, obvious things like murder. It includes relational problems, character flaws, attitudes, gossip, arrogance, disobeying parents, lack of understanding, lack of love or mercy. It feels like a complete breakdown, socially and individually.
It really does.
Now, someone might say, well, many societies grapple with these issues. How does this text specifically tie this whole long list back to that initial rejection of God's knowledge, rather than just seeing them as separate problems?
That's the key to the argument here. This list isn't presented as just a random collection of human failings. If you look at the flow, it's positioned as the natural outpouring of that depraved mind, which itself resulted from failing to retain the knowledge of God.
So these are the things that people do what ought not to be done because their thinking is corrupted.
Exactly. It's the practical manifestation of that cognitive and moral breakdown across all sorts of interactions. The text argues these behaviors aren't isolated issues, but are deeply interconnected consequences, all stemming from that foundational spiritual and intellectual choice regarding God.
So the implication for us today is that a fundamental shift in our deepest beliefs, especially about a creator, could, according to this text, lead to really widespread and diverse negative outcomes, affecting everything from personal character to how society functions.
That's the argument it lays out. It definitely forces you to think about the potential root causes of societal problems from this perspective.
Okay, then the passage wraps up with one final thought in verse 32, and it's particularly striking. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do them, but also approve of those who practice them. That adds a whole other layer, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not just doing the actions anymore, it's approving of them.
What does that mean to approve in this context, especially when it says they know the righteous decree and the consequence deserve death, which might signify ultimate separation or judgment in this theology?
It raises a really unsettling question, right? What does it mean to approve, even while knowing the stakes? It suggests moving beyond just individual wrongdoing into a kind of collective endorsement, a societal acceptance, maybe even celebration, of what the text defines as fundamentally wrong.
So it's like a cultural shift, validating these actions.
That seems to be the idea. A shift from individual acts, perhaps done in secret, to a cultural validation or normalization. And this happens, the text says, despite some underlying awareness of that righteous decree. It implies a deeper level of corruption where the moral compass isn't just ignored, it's actively inverted.
So it's not just individuals slipping up, but a culture potentially validating and applauding these things, even with some inherent sense of what's right. That's a challenging point for any society to consider, including ours.
Absolutely. This final verse highlights this deep disconnect. Possessing some knowledge of God's standard, yet simultaneously engaging in and sanctioning actions contrary to it. The really provocative thought here is about that human capacity to know the potential consequences, yet not only proceed, but also validate those actions in others. It points to a profound dilemma.
Okay, so we've taken a deep dive into Romans 1.1832. We've explored its claims that knowledge of God is plain, accessible through creation, yet people choose not to honor or thank him. And this choice, the text argues, leads down a path futile thinking, exchanging God's glory for created things.
And then being sequentially given over, first to impurity, then to disordered desires, and ultimately to a depraved mind.
Manifesting in that long, disturbing list of destructive behaviors, and culminating not just in doing these things, but in societally approving of them.
Right. The passage draws this incredibly strong, direct line between that initial choice deciding it's not worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, and a subsequent thorough unraveling of moral and ethical frameworks, both for individuals and society. It's a step-by-step argument with profound implications.
So what does this all mean for you listening today?
Well, this ancient text really pushes us, doesn't it? It challenges us to consider what knowledge we truly think is worth holding on to in our lives,
Mm.
especially foundational knowledge about existence, about ultimate reality.
It presents this stark argument that there's a real cost, a kind of deep unraveling, when fundamental truths are not just forgotten, but actively pushed aside or deemed unimportant.
So maybe the question for you is, what are the unquestioned givens in your own view of the world? And what might be the unseen impact of those foundational ideas where it become futile? Or if you exchange them for lesser things, what knowledge are you perhaps allowing to fade or not deeming worth retaining? And what could be the potential ripple effects of that choice, both in your own life and maybe even in the culture around you? It's certainly a powerful call to reflect on what we prioritize, knowing in an age absolutely saturated with information.
That's our deep dive for today. Join us next time as we unpack another stack of sources to help you become better informed.